Okay, welcome everybody. This is xLab's quarterly third meeting about digital twins. So thank you for joining us. We're going to give people a few more minutes to log on, and then we'll get started in just a couple minutes after 1 o'clock. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions that you want to submit to the speakers or Professor Yu, you can enter that in the Q&A section or the chat section, and we'll be checking that periodically. At some point, Youngjin, I believe, is going to, Professor Yu is going to ask people to submit questions and field them as we go through the presentation.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead and start. Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are. Good morning. Hello, everybody. I am Professor Youngjin Yu from Case Western Reserve University, and I am the faculty director of xLab. This is our regular quarterly meeting, and today we'll be talking about digital twins and digital transformation. So this is a topic for today's quarterly meeting. Let me just go through a quick agenda screen so that we are all on the same page. I'd like to take a few minutes to explain what xLab is, and for those who are not familiar with us. xLab is a interdisciplinary university-wide initiative started from the Weatherhead School of Management, but we work broadly with all stakeholders on campus at Case Western Reserve University. The goal is to work with legacy companies who are not necessarily digital natives and help them to start their digital transformation and accelerate those digital transformation efforts by connecting with our talented students and faculty members through various different programs. So one of the main activities that we do is a student-led digital innovation projects. These are top priority digital innovation projects that these companies do, and the students work on real-life innovation projects with real data, real problem. And the members who worked with our students have had a great experience in working with them. And then, obviously, this quarterly meeting is another event that we organize, and this is also very well attended and popular program, and more and more people joining us every time we run. So today we have two distinguished panelists joining us, and I will briefly introduce them here, and then we'll talk a few minutes about digital twin, and then I will ask our speakers to spend about 10 minutes on this topic each, and then we will bring them together and then have some dialogue, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So the first panelist we have is Mr. Amol Adgaonkar from Microsoft. I hope I pronounced your last name correct. And he's a director of manufacturing industry at Microsoft, and he's one of the leaders working on digital twin initiatives at Microsoft. And our second speaker panelist is Dr. Stefan Siedel from University of Liechtenstein, and here's his picture right here. And he has been recently appointed as a vice rector, so for all academic development. So he's overseeing faculty development and research programs for the entire university. Among many other things, digital twin is one of his key current research interests. So that's what we will be focusing on today. The digital twin is the topic that we will be focusing on today. So what is digital twin? Well, digital twin, this is a definition that I took from IBM and added a little bit. But it is a digital twin is a virtual representation of an object, person, or system that spans its entire life cycle, is updated from real-time data, uses simulation, machine learning, and reasoning to help decision making. Now, why are we talking about it? Well, Gartner, according to Gartner, this is the famous Gartner hype chart, and this was one made in 2018. So digital twin was at the peak of the hype cycle in 2018. What that means is that now it is getting real. It is coming down from that peak. Usually they say at about 5 years since the peak for it becomes mainstream technology. We are not done yet, however. So this is last year's hype cycle. And then you will see here is that digital twin for person is up and coming, and it is climbing up on the hype cycle. So with this background, this is an important topic we believe that we need to think about. So I hope that our panelists will, enlighten us with some additional discussion about what is digital twin. Is it real? What are some of the use case scenarios for legacy firms, and where is it going? What are some of the things that we need to think about? So that's sort of like a brief overview of where we are and how we will talk about this topic. And so I'm going to first invite Amol to come to the main screen. Let me see if I could bring him up here, and then take us through his, maybe 10-minute, 5 to 10-minute presentation. Then we'll invite Dr. Stefan Siedel on our main screen. So Amol, take it away.
Thank you, Professor Yu, and thank you for the opportunity to connect with the xLab's team and members here for this mindshare. Again, in the way of introduction, I'm Amol Adgaonkar. I'm part of the worldwide manufacturing industry team here at Microsoft and primarily lead our point of view in terms of digital twins in the manufacturing industry. So what I'll do in the next 10 minutes is sort of give you a flavor for where we see the technology come in and where we see the adoption from an industry standpoint, and sort of give you a flavor for our point of view when it comes to digital twins. I hope you can see my screen okay? Yes, perfect. Thank you. So let me first start off with this concept of the metaverse. And those of you who are into gaming probably know this concept, but it's essentially the way it's defined is it's a collective virtual shared space, which enables collaborations across different virtual worlds. And it has elements of the augmented reality, the connectivity between the physical and the persistent virtual space, as they call it. So, this metaverse is in simple terms, is like a parallel universe that we physically live and breathe and operate in. So if you look at these layers that you see on the screen and you take a look at it from the bottom up, in the very bottom, you'll see our physical world. This is the world we touch and interact and live and breathe. But when it comes to the digital, there is sort of a connection layer, if you will, as the first bit that gets us from the physical to the digital. And this is where you have technologies like IoT and connectivity, and in the manufacturing world, when it comes to a factory floor, people talk about connecting to machines and getting data from it, and sort of keeping the digital world in sync with the physical world. So that's sort of the first layer of this metaverse, if you will. And then once you have the data coming in from the physical sensors and devices, you have an opportunity to build models on top. And this is where really the digital twins play a big role in terms of modeling the physical world and understanding it from a digital sense. And once you have a model, you can then monitor performance of your digital, of your physical world through the digital lens. You can do analytics on it. You can go forward and backward in time. You can forecast, you can predict, you can do simulations on it. ultimately, if you have ability to build machine learning or AI-based controls over it for autonomous learning and so on and so forth, and sort of build that rich digital metaverse that then augments the physical world. And of course, there is a, last but not the least, there's a layer on top to sort of have us humans ultimately interact with these digital worlds. Now, this could be in the form of dashboards, or it could be a mixed reality environment which allows you to fully immerse and interact with this digital metaverse. So this is think of it like a layer cake. It's not necessarily a monolithic view. You can be anywhere in this journey. You could start from a certain layer, go up, go down. You can add capabilities to it. But this is kind of where we see, a lot of the people in the industry think about the evolution from a metaverse perspective. We are working with AB InBev, for example, in their brewing process, and looking at it and saying, how do I take this brewing process to be more optimized? I don't want to, put organic grain in a tank and wait for 3 weeks or a month to then figure out that the fermentation has gone right or wrong. I want this visibility upfront, right on day 2 or day 3 to predict and see if my fermentation is going to be good or not. So, these are the kind of capabilities that the digital twins sort of enable from this metaverse perspective. You have now a digital representation of that physical object. But when it comes specifically to digital twins, very often we get asked, there are so many interpretations of what a digital twin is in the industry, that it's sort of important to just understand, different contexts around it, different scenarios around digital twins. So what we've done here is put a framework, and what you see in terms of roles of this framework, again, I'm primarily looking at it from a manufacturing perspective, but you have a product or asset that you make and sell. It could be anything from a widget to a car to an aircraft. It could be the factory in which these products are made, or the supply chain that feeds this factory. Or even what we call as smart spaces, which is buildings, warehouses, the inside of an aircraft and whatnot. So you have these different scenarios that play out for digital twins, and there are different applications of these twins, what you see as columns on this chart. If you were to ask me 20 years back, what's a digital twin, very often the engineer's answer would be, I'm keeping track of the as designed and as manufactured bill of material that goes on an aircraft, for example, in terms of the mechanical parts, electrical parts, the software on it, the firmware on it, and just keeping track of these as designed, as manufactured, as maintained from a bill of material perspective was a big application for digital twins to start off, and we've come a long way since then. Now we have IoT data that can give you more of a capability to understand the asset health, asset performance. You can do asset management type of scenarios with this telemetry coming in from these devices. You can get into more advanced scenarios like process control, where you have, let's say, an assembly line or a large chemical plant with multiple assets, giving you data and telemetry from these sources. You can then get into more advanced scenarios around performance management, and this is a very exciting new area where you look at a digital twin of a supply chain, for example. There are people trying to create a financial digital twin of a supply chain, for example, to understand your customers' fill rate or performance, or what's your financial position in terms of inbound and outbound inventory and so on and so forth. There's also a risk supply chain, risk digital twin that has been created by a partner of ours, and it's being used by the Defense Logistics Agency to really model the risk of food supply to our troops around the world. So there are applications like this in the digital twin sense from a performance management perspective that are evolving very rapidly. And the last but not the least, there's a column on the right which you see, it says simulation modeling. This is again a brand new area that sort of brings in the engineering design time simulations. Think of finite element analysis, fluid dynamics, and the models that were used by engineers upfront in designing a product, now being brought in the digital twin sense in the operational context. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're looking at designing a mixer that mixes two liquids, and you used fluid dynamics to simulate the mixing process, and you designed a mixer. And now in your chemical plant, you have 5 of these mixers who are mixing these different liquids, and you want to understand how the quality of the mix is. Now for that, you could use the same simulation models that you built upfront in the design stage and bring them to life in the operational sense, have 5 copies of those simulation models, which then give you a simulated telemetry, if you will, of these assets from their mixing process perspective. Another example of that is, when you cannot put a sensor, let's say you want to find the temperature at the core of the jet exhaust, and you can't, the temperature is too hot, you can't put a sensor over there. Well, what you can do is look at the airflow, look at the periphery or the temperature around the shell of the engine, and then have a modeling approach towards generating that simulated telemetry for it. So that's again a new source of data that digital twins are now able to generate from a simulation perspective to be brought into a more richer context for digital twin applications. So again, that's an example of how we think of the different applications. You might say, my thinking of digital twins is this, and sure, there are no wrong answers. It's just that all of these digital twins are being matured and they need to coexist together. And we have some great use cases when it comes to bringing this to life. I'll share some examples. If you know of Unilever, they make these soaps. If you're familiar with the Dove soap, it's a product that has to look right, feel right, smell right. It has to have the logo printed right. And one of the key factors in the soap making process is the amount of moisture that goes into the process. It's an extrusion process, and it takes a certain amount of accuracy for the operator to control and define, depending on the type of the recipe, the type of the soap, and the speed of operations, and so on. You have to have the right amount of setting. Now, the world they were in was, they were operators turning dials all day long, trying to optimize the process. But when they invested in this technology with us, they built a digital twin of their production process. They could then build a machine learning algorithm to understand, what setting, what recipe, what speed, and what's the moisture setting to control to be sort of get the optimal product output. And then, initially it starts off as generating a recommendation for the operators, and then the operators loved it so much they said, well, if the bot can do a much better job than I can, and it's always right, why don't we have that sort of digital twin feed that value to the process controller itself? So what you're seeing is sort of a closed loop then coming to life, where now is the digital twin of the process that self-optimizes and autonomously sets the moisture and the humidity setting in this sort of process control context for the soap making process. So that's one example. A second example of this is ThyssenKrupp, who has done some great work with us. As you know, they are an elevator company, and they move people vertically across buildings, and in big cities, take New York City for example. There are some estimates that about 40% livable real estate is actually lost to elevator shafts, because the taller the building goes, you have to have more shafts, and you can only go so many floors with cables and so on. So one of the things that they are innovating with is sort of coming up with a way to have multiple elevator cabs in a single shaft. And now think about this scenario, right? This is they're using magnetic levitation and type of technology to move these cabs through a tall shaft. And they used digital twins to sort of understand the average amount of wait time for a particular customer to go from floor A to floor B, run a bunch of simulations around, fire evacuation, emergency situations, and so on and so forth. And when they had a full sort of digital view of what that would look like, and how many cabs, how many floors, and so on, they then actually physically built a tower in Rottweil in Germany. What you're seeing is this picture on the screen is a real tower that they built to then test out the digital models and validate it. So what you're seeing here is also in sort of an evolution where, rather than the digital just tracking the physical, you now have these sort of cutting edge companies starting with digital first. They want to digitally simulate the whole world first before they physically test it out. And this from a prototyping perspective, is a huge acceleration in the amount of time it takes to launch a new product or new service. So coming back to this, again, you probably know the Rolls-Royce example. 50 years back, they launched this Power by the Hour as a service, and they actually use digital twins of engines. They have serialized assets that they can track that are mid-air, in flight, on wing, and they can track the performance of these assets and monitor its health. They've also invested in a consortium with us called V4I, stands for Virtual Validation, Visualization, and Verification. And what it does is sort of brings these digital models, the airflow model, the structural model, the heat transfer model, all these simulation models which typically operate in silos. We now have an opportunity to bring it together with the cloud computing platform, which is big enough, scalable enough. You now have a large enough computing environment where these multiple simulation models can be run together to digitally verify and validate a new design or a new engine before you even make the first prototype. And if you think about it, it takes years in the making, it costs millions of dollars. To be able to do this digitally is a huge advantage that the digital twins of the engine from a modeling simulation perspective brings it to life. So to summarize, and what I'm sort of telling you in terms of customer stories and examples is, we get asked very often, how's digital twin different than a dashboard or a report system that I've built over so many years? What's different about it? And there are at least 4 things that we see as common themes bubble up as true differentiators. The first is the fact that a digital twin, more than a dashboard, is an ability to actually control. So think about a dashboard being that only has one directional flow of information from the asset to the screen to you. Think of digital twins allowing a bi-directional control. So you basically have an ability to remotely control the physical process, right? That's one key aspect that differentiates digital twin from a dashboard, that you can now touch a button and change something physically. That's number one. The second big is the capability to rewind and replay. The what if scenarios and simulations that ThyssenKrupp did is to be able to go back in time, figure out what happened. If something happened or something went wrong in your factory, you can scroll back, understand, and then fix. You can do root cause analysis and so on and so forth. So lots of what if capabilities that digital twins bring in. Of course, the ability to serially track assets by serial number or individual, be it cars, tracking cars by VIN number or tracking aircrafts by their tail number. Doing this is now possible with the power of the cloud that brings, that you can bring into the digital twin infrastructure. And last but not the least is this capability around digital verification validation, which is huge, especially in the defense world and in terms of medical devices, to be able to, sort of digitally verify, let's say, a 3D printed, surgical part that the doctor can then print, digitally validate, and then get certified to be able to surgically implant. So, lots of exciting areas and application digital twins. But let me take a pause here and hand it over back to you, Professor Yu.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Without any further delay, I'm going to just bring Professor Seidel to the spotlight and move Amol back to the background. So,
thank you. If you can also help me unshare my screen. For some reason, I don't have a way to unshare, but
okay, let me see if I could do that. I'm not sure if
thank you.
Okay, yeah, that. So all right, Stefan, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Youngjin. I can't share my screen at this point. Can you please allow me to share? Now I can. Now I can. Can you see my screen as full screen? Yes, wonderful. Professor Yu, Youngjin, and thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here. It's a privilege. And Amol, thank you for your presentation and giving us these wonderful ideas about what digital twins are about and what are application scenarios of digital twins. And I'm going to pick up on where you started from. So this idea of a metaverse. And the argument that I'll be making is that at this point, a digital twin, or the idea of digital twin, is a rhetorical device that can help us make sense of a much, much larger development than just representing some physical entity. And you gave us some wonderful examples. digital twins are really something that helps us connect to what you already called the metaverse. That is going to be the point. And I'm going to proceed in 3 steps. I'll first talk about some observations that we've made through our empirical research. And then I'll talk about this conceptual idea of a digital twin as being the glue that helps us to bring the physical into the digital and vice versa. And then I'll make some comments about how I think this is important from the perspective of organizational strategy. And I believe if we have a very broad understanding of digital twins, it opens up the discussion for a very large space of companies, also those outside the manufacturing industries. So here's some quotes that from our empirical research. So one person, an IT manager, said, most of what I could also represent, I do not, because it might give me more information, but would rather obscure the picture. I have to decide what is the level of digital twin. So what is the level, perhaps in terms of fidelity, accuracy that you're attending to? Another person is bringing it to the philosophical level and is saying, look, in order to have real digital twins, we first need a physical theory of everything. So this person is talking about this idea of a twin being identical to what it's representing. And the last quote I chose because I kind of found it funny. So this person is saying, if you call it a digital twin, digital shadow, digital representation of Mickey Mouse, it does not make a difference to me. And one of the things that you said early in your speech, Amol, was different people understand different things under the notion of digital twin. And that's something that's very important from a conceptual point of view. So here's what academics say, or at least a group of academics that published a paper in 2018, a much cited paper, in fact. The digital twin is commonly known as a key enabler for the digital transformation. However, in the literature is no common understanding concerning the term. So academia cannot help us either. What I find is important is this notion of digital twin is something that matters for digital transformation. And the point I'm making is, let's not think too much about what digital twin is, but how we use the term and what it can tell us about digital transformation and about digital innovation. One of the things that seem to be very important when we speak to practitioners is that there are mostly 2 groups who are interested in digital twins at this point. One group is engineers, and they have a specific logic, and I'm oversimplifying here on purpose. And then there's people who are interested in innovation, new business models, changing business models. And something interesting is happening here. So when we speak to engineers about digital twins, they typically have fairly confined specific problems with specific dimensions. So for instance, let's reduce the scrap rate or something like that, some predictive maintenance issue. So it's problem solving, and the digital twin becomes a tool in order to allow for that problem solving. When we speak to people who are into developing and advancing business models, they're much more interested in how can we use the availability of data and digital twins in order to explore new ways of doing things, new business models, and so forth. And this comes with what I would call a top-down approach on the one hand side. So here's my process, it's a best practice. And now let's think about, what data do we need in order to improve on this process? And the alternative perspective is, here's all the data, and digital twins are producing this data, and what can we do with it in terms of exploration, in terms of changing the process. And so we're still talking about this understanding of digital twins and the ambiguity that comes with the term. And another issue that I find important is that typically when we speak about digital twins, it's about let's twin something physical, a machine. Amol spoke about machines, people. Young Jin, when you showed the Gartner cycle, so now it's about twinning people. And obviously in the COVID period, this became something that people were interested in, right? But we can also twin the digital. And now imagine you're, in an industry that makes video games, and you're interested in, finding out something about how people interact with the video game. And what you see here on the slide is an example of what Ubisoft, the company who made a game called Ghost Recon Wildlands, calls a heat map. So they analyzed not only the movements of single players, but they analyzed the movements of the entirety of all of the players of the game in order to, come up with a new feature. So that's more of the exploration perspective. And another issue that came through in Amol's talk was there's so many different things that we can have not only representations of, but that we can twin in somewhere. We can look at devices, we can look at people, we can look at organizations, perhaps entire value chains. And a lot of people would say the real value of digital twins lies in representing the orchestration of, entities, as in processes and so forth. And now the natural reaction would probably be something like, how can we twin an organization? Organizations are what we call complex adaptive systems. So a lot is going on in an organization, and but people are thinking about that. So there's academic papers now exploring this ideas of building an organizational digital twin, or this is fairly recent, digital twin of an organization. Are you serious? So the point I'm making is digital twins can be a lot of different things, and different people have different opinions in terms of what it can do. The perspective that Amol gave us was about, the entire life cycle, for instance, but also the level at which a digital twin can, help represent and perhaps control an entity. The big question is, so what is this all about? And what I'm suggesting is let's zoom out and let's go back to where Amol started, the idea of a metaverse. And the notion of metaverse was coined by an author. His name is Neil Stephenson, who wrote a book in 1992. A novel. It's a great novel, by the way. So if you have some time, read Snow Crash. That's what it's called. And in Snow Crash, there's a protagonist. His name is Hero, and he's a pizza delivery boy in real life, but he immerses himself in the metaverse. And the idea of the metaverse is that we see a convergence of the physical and the digital. And I listened very carefully, Amol, to what you said, and you said there's going to be a parallel universe. And I'm going to challenge that. I'm going to say it's going to be the world in that we're living. It's going to be this connected, convergent world of the physical and the digital. And here's an understanding of the metaverse. One, and as the metaverse, as the digital twin is perhaps a rhetorical device. Probably the metaverse is a cool new name and a rhetorical device in itself. The metaverse is the convergence of physical reality, augmented reality, and virtual reality in one large ecosystem of ecosystems. That's the world we're going to live in. It allows for economic transactions, it's decentralized, it's fully connected. And that has some important ramifications for each of us who is interested in not only digital twins, but any type of digital connectivity. But I'll get to the point why digital twins are so important. So this is something that I find super cool every time I see it. So the top-down view of your car. So you're parking somewhere and you see there's, some tree next to you or whatever. And it's a wonderful example. You're sitting on this physical device, you see a digital representation, a stylized digital representation for that matter. So it's the physical entity, it's the human, it's the digital sphere, it's the confluence that we're talking about. So here's some assumptions. So again, digital twin, ambiguous term, many different understandings, but what does it really mean? And now we're talking about the metaverse. First, you cannot not participate in the metaverse. So the very moment you're digitally connected, you'll be part of this new world. A digital twin, and this is the conceptual understanding of digital twin, connects an entity. It can be any entity. It can be a person, it can be a machine, it can be a collection of entities, of devices, to the metaverse. And understanding what that means has implications, has ramifications for organizations' strategic choices. And that's the key point I want to make here. And here's a quote, and I took the liberty to take a quote from Microsoft, from Sam George, who's talking about Microsoft's Azure strategy, about which Amol was also talking. This shift represents a convergence of the physical and digital worlds. As these spaces come together, they create a new world of opportunity and transformative solutions that will change everything. We think of these solutions as metaverse apps. And now we can actually look at all the big tech companies and we'll find some important people speak about the metaverse. So we could look at Epic Games, for instance, and Tim Sweeney is going to tell us the Unreal game engine is going to be an important part of the infrastructure. Or we look at Facebook, and this is something I took from this website. As June came to an end, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg told his employees about an ambitious new initiative. The future of the company would go far beyond its current project of building a set of connected social apps and some hardware to support them. Instead, Facebook would strive to build a maximalist, interconnected set of experiences straight out of sci-fi, Neil Stephenson's novel, Snow Crash. And we could continue. So everyone's excited about the metaverse and sees this new confluence and convergence of the digital and the physical. So digital twins are, and that's my argument, perhaps the vehicle by which the physical is brought into the digital sphere, and vice versa. Digital twins on this view are metaverse interfaces, regardless what understanding of digital twins you have. Digital twins, their counterparts, so their physical or other digital counterparts, and the metaverse co-evolve. They are all processes, not things. The video game example illustrates that nicely. Think of a video game that is changing over time. And as the game is changing, so will its twin be changing. So process, not thing. And that's my final slide. So when companies think about strategy, they need to consider this. They need to ask questions about what is this new emergent thing that we call the metaverse going to mean for us as a company? So from a connectivity perspective, when we look at IoT, the question is, what do you connect to the metaverse? Is it going to be machines? Is it going to be processes? Is it going to be people? Is it going to be something else? Then the question is, how are you going to connect to the metaverse? So what platform ecosystems will you be participating in? And that's an important choice, right? So Amol would probably say Azure, that's the solution. That's how you get into the metaverse. But there are other people who might have alternative options, or perhaps it's a combination of all of these things. And then eventually, from a strategic perspective, the question is why? So why would you want to connect? Why do you need a digital twin? And why would you want to connect to the metaverse? What do you want to offer? Is there any way for you to sell more of whatever you're selling? Is there a way to improve on your processes? Is there a way of improving on your supply chain? So there's an unlimited number of potentials and questions that we're looking at. So the metaverse becomes an important element to consider in strategic development of organizations, and digital twins are the vehicle by which you connect to the metaverse. And I actually lied to you. This is my final slide. So here's my summary. First, the notion of digital twin at this point, since everyone has a different opinion, is a rhetorical device, but it helps us to make sense of an important phenomenon, which is bringing the physical into the digital and vice versa. The questions will be, how do you connect to the metaverse? What do you want to connect to the metaverse? And why do you want to connect to the metaverse, regardless of your industry? The metaverse and the digital twin metaphor are helping us to reason about a much larger phenomenon, and for organizations, it'll be important to consider these ideas in their strategy development. Thank you so much for listening. I'm looking forward to our discussion. And again, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. All
right, let me bring Amol back and also myself back to the spotlight. So thank you, both of you. This was really, interesting and exciting conversation. For the audience, I'd encourage you to type in questions and comments through the Q&A window. We will address those shortly after. As I was listening to both of your talk, this connecting to the mission of xLab, where we work with these traditional, legacy companies. And when you bring up topics like a digital twin, or even, even worse, metaverse, a lot of, executives and, employees and managers just check out, this is not for me. This is like a different world. And, I'm just barely, setting up my database and, and I'm just thinking about, Microsoft Cloud, and now you guys are talking about way out there. So here's something that I'd like to think about, and the idea of a metaverse as part of or bigger story where this, the digital twin is a part of. The idea that the convergence between physical, virtual, augmented reality all coming together, represented world and virtual world, and that doesn't exist, and then and so on, and then the key here is that this interface between the physical and digital world, and that's the digital twin. And the question is, in order to do that, you need both. The convergence means that there's a physical players and digital players. So the message to the traditional companies, a physical first, a physical native companies, is that the fact that you are not digital native or pure digital play does not mean that this metaverse is something happening out there. It is likely going to happen, or it is already happening right here now. And whether you know it or not, we are part of it. I think that's something that I'd like to think about. And one thing that, perhaps we could think about it, is that, the very last question that Stefan raised is, why do we do this, right? And then I'd like us to think about this notion of value creation and value capture. The very idea of this interface means potentially there is value that can be created any one of these places, whether it is augmented, whether it is virtual, whether it is physical, and that value that is created can flow through different realms of experiences, right? And that is really exciting, actually, when you think about it. So the good example is what is happening in crypto world, and then the value that is created now being tied to the actual currency, and now there is an actual whole new economic activities that are taking place, right? So when I think about this kind of like a digital world, I often think about, I notice our colleague Peter Richkin is here, and we think about this, derivative world, the world of leverage. So by definition, IT, the virtual world, is a tool of leverage, right? By creating digital representation, we can do more than what we can do with physical assets. We define the physical law of gravity, and we can put people in more than one place. We create this leverage, and when you actually do the leverage of leverage, like a digital twin of virtual, now we are really getting into this the kind of old 2008 world of financial instrument, and I'm tying back to the idea of a value. So this is extremely potentially powerful tool for value creation. And just like a financial derivative did a lot of damage to the world, I think it could be also extremely dangerous tool that could do a lot of damage to the world as well, right? So I just thought that we may want to think about those and kind of think about what we might want to do. So now, before we go to the audience comments, I wonder maybe both Amol and Stefan, where would you suggest companies to begin? Not from the perspective of Fortune 100, who's been spending billions of dollars on IT infrastructure, right? So I'm like a mid-market traditional manufacturing gadget manufacturers. I'm making tools, right? And then I just got like a CNC machines and that world. Is it for me? Should I think about it even, or should I just wait? If we have to jump in, where do we begin? Amol?
Yeah, it's a great question. And by the way, Stefan, great presentation and concepts, because I'll tie on that. I think one of the things Stefan mentioned was you cannot not be in the metaverse. I think this is a really key point. Gartner also did research to figure out that almost 75% of the people they queried didn't realize that they were already using digital twins in some shape or form without calling it so. So you might have different names for it. In the simplest world, if you ever ordered a pizza on your phone app and you got pizza delivered, you have quintessentially lived through the metaverse in some sense. So I think, and this is a key aspect of the transformation. When you look at, business executives today, they are now also realizing the power that digital twins bring in. A great example of this, again, I'll go back to the Unilever story. They have invested these digital twins across. They have 200 factories around the world, plus another 100 contract manufacturing sites. It's a very large global operations, and they are deploying these twins across the world, across their factories around the world. When you have that digital muscle, when the pandemic hit last year, one of the cool things they could do was they also make ice creams, if you know. Of their brands, they could switch the lines that made ice cream to making hand sanitizers. And this switch was feasible. If you think about a conventional manufacturing organization, this would be a nightmare scenario, right? To change production from one thing to make something completely different. But when you have invested in the digital muscle behind, when you have a digital twin of the process, you can make these changes or switches to making another product, or the agility that these digital twins bring you is just phenomenal. And Unilever is a shining example of that. I mean, they have done this investment and they're now reaping the benefits of this agility to switch from ice creams to hand sanitizer. So again, the value is apparent, and I think executives should think beyond. It's not about a product or a service or a solution, per se. You should look at the broader business outcome that they want to achieve. If it's agility, if it's productivity, efficiency, it might start with machine downtime or monitoring, your OEE, as it's known popularly, the operating efficiency, equipment efficiency on the factory floor. Whatever be those metrics, I think you start with the business outcome first and then work backwards, and you'll naturally pull in the right technology components behind.
Stefan?
Thank you so much, and I'm so glad you're bringing up the question. And I want to make 2 points. The first one is, so for those who are not the big manufacturing companies, for instance, or car producers or whatever, so what's in there with digital twins? It's important to know that you can turn to a lot of manufacturing companies and they have not yet full-fledged, digital twins. So this is something that's new to many. And I think the simple awareness that you cannot not be in the metaverse is important. So you have to pay attention to that, right? So now the question is, how do you do that? And there's something very important, which very much relates to your own work, Young-Jin, which is the fact that now we have this space where we can innovate, where we can have modular innovations without creating silos. So if you go back to the infrastructures before we had cloud solutions like Azure and others, when you started to develop a system, you had a monolithic system in place. So now you can start creating services and you can start, prototype something and see if it works. And some of the successful examples that we're seeing is where people start identifying use cases, if you will, identifying a problem, and then see if they can use their existing infrastructure in order to, create a solution for that problem using sensor. Just imagine some existing machine, add some sensor to the machine, collect the data and see what you can do with that in order to, improve on quality or whatever. And as you do that and you start adding services to your infrastructure, these services can be used for something else. So you're creating options for subsequent innovation, right? And I think if, you're not a big manufacturing company, you're not needing digital twins for a car or a plane or, a skyscraper, start small, start prototyping and see what value you can generate from that. So limit cost and see what opportunities there. That's one strategy. We can certainly discuss more. Thank you.
Yeah, so that reminds me, Stefan, the case study that we saw at Digital Futures Conference first year, where, a company has a solution of like the sensors that can be added on to existing machine. You do not have to replace the machine that you have to have a IoT enabled machines. You could actually enable certain sensors and then beginning to focus on certain data sets and so on. So thank you. Let's go to take some questions here. I'm going to start from the top one from Mark. So when do you involve end users in digital twin process? When do you or do we involve end users?
Yeah, I think if I can take that one, I think you want an early involvement of the end users as early as possible in terms of your design or your conceptualization of this, because very often what we see the evolution towards autonomous starts in terms of mimicking what the human does to begin with. So there's a lot of knowledge, information in terms of the tapping into, let's say, if it's a machine operator or if it's a end user of some sort, modeling that or capturing that behavior or insight first usually is a great starting point, in addition to the additional process details or whatnot. So I think definitely having them involved early. The example I gave earlier is, again, in terms of you might, before you go to a fully autonomous operation, you might want to give alerts or recommendations, and that's how it typically starts. The humans have a better intuitive sense of validating these or capturing other elements that you might not have captured. So it's sort of a mechanism to validate, and once you have that comfort level, then it automatically evolves to this more autonomous operations mode in some sense. So I would say early involvement is always better.
Yeah, and given that digital twin and metaverse is the frontier of digital technology revolution, and rule number one in any IT innovation is engaging users early and fast and meaningfully, right? So I think there's no exception. So maybe Stefan, next one you could take on. This is a bit more philosophical question. And so, the metaverse, I don't think it is necessarily a digital twin, but metaverse, what do we do with this nation state laws and boundaries? Does it, exceed, or, are we bounded by? How do you see this playing out?
Okay, first of all, that's a great question. Second, I'm not an expert in that area, but I'll try to give an answer. So first of all, by using this notion of metaverse, we're trying to take a bit of a different perspective on the internet. That's the key important part of the technology stack. So effectively, we're talking about something like Internet 2.0 or something, right? So all the problems we're gonna, or at least a large part of the problems we're gonna face with the metaverse are the problems we're currently facing with the internet. And as we all know, regulation is happening at different levels. There's national regulation, there's regional, as in European Union, and there's international. And that's the same problems that's gonna occur. Another example is blockchain. So how do you, now there's cryptocurrencies, and if you look at, how governments look at currencies, you should not have an alternate currency. So that is creating a major problem, but in some way we need to find regulation. So my answer is a very vague answer, I know that, but I'm saying we're going to continue and probably even to a larger extent see the same problems that we've been facing. Sorry for not being more precise.
So maybe I will also ask Amol, have you seen any cases of deploying metaverse or digital twin technology among your multinational clients? You ran into this challenge and conflict of, what the company is trying to do and what different countries are trying to do, and therefore you had to deal with this exact tension.
Yeah, I think, and again, I agree with Stefan. It's a great question because we have to comply with the local laws and regulations in the country you operate in the way these things are defined. For example, a lot of manufacturing happens in China as a great example, and there is data sovereignty requirements for China. There are cloud requirements there. There are organizational requirements as to how multinational companies might be headquartered in Europe but still operate in Asia Pacific. You have to comply to those local regulations. So we are, from a Microsoft perspective, we are fully committed to complying and bringing that technology solution so that we are compliant in the region, in every region that we operate. So I think that's the stance we are taking. If you stretch that out a little bit more, I think the question's getting more towards philosophical. Who should drive what, right? Should the real geopolitical constraints drive the metaverse, or vice versa? Should the openness of the metaverse drive it? And I think that's an interesting bit that is, of course, open for interpretation. But the way internet has leveled the playing field, I mean, the world before the internet was very different than the world after internet. You see a lot of now, communication technologies have leveled the playing field between the developed and the developing nations. It's fair to assume that there might be something similar that this, metaverse will then affect. If you scroll forward another 20 years, that's a very interesting area to wait and watch.
Yeah, and also the idea of this internet as the force of leveling the field. At the dawn of the internet, I think there was a very, in a way, I would say, a naive optimism that we will all unify the entire world. There's a opportunity for open innovations and ideas sharings and endless opportunity. Over the last decade or so, we have seen that geopolitical fragmentation of the internet, and China is pretty much on their own with big platforms that are mostly within China. I think Europe probably is a little falling behind in that sort of fragmentation, still relying on quite a bit of American, platform owners. But I think likely to come up with their own, given all these regulations coming from EU. US probably will continue to try to do that, but they still, start regulating their own platforms. So, over the next few years, I think, or decade or so, I think we will see a reversal trend of this sort of a fragmentation toward the fragmentation of the internet. And I don't know whether this metaverse will reverse that trend, or it will accelerate, or somewhere cut in the middle, and therefore, we may see something else. But I think that the folks who are doing technology work really needs to paying attention to the geopolitical, the environment, because I think we cannot not think about it as the world is getting more connected. So the last question is coming from Fred. It's a bit academic question in a way, that the notion of a boundary object that we have been using as a form of representation. What do you think, Stefan? How should we think about, would the notion like a boundary object or representation, help us to push it, more, not only in terms of research, but also for companies to use the notion of a metaverse and digital twin?
I would say yes. And I think that's what we've been also trying to do here. It is opening up a discourse, and it's connecting different perspective on what conceivably might be the same thing. We don't know that, right? So we're just starting a discourse about, what it is going to be. And I'm very thankful, and I'm going to relate that to what you just had as a discussion a minute ago. So questions around who will own the metaverse? What is my role in relation to the metaverse, right? Super important questions, and we need some form of boundary, object in order to be able to think about that and talk about that. And to get back to this, the question, what does it mean to the, non-big technology company? So I think for a big technology company, the question might be a little more straightforward. You want to provide some infrastructure, you want to provide some software, you want to provide some platform, ideally, on which the metaverse is, going to run. But as let's say, I know there are people from insurance, for instance, as an insurance company, the question is, how am I going to participate in that? So first of all, you need to make sense of what it is. Second, boundary object. Second, you need to make sense of what it means to your business or to your future business. And then you need to think about, so how am I going to connect? And I think that's a trajectory of questions that are important questions that everyone needs to ask themselves, including, academics.
So I think, for those who are not familiar with this theoretical construct of a boundary object. So boundary object typically means literally the objects that are in the boundary, and then the boundary across different communities of knowledge, people who have different understanding. So, map is a boundary object. So we could actually point to the map and then understand how the geography works. So library categorical system is a boundary object. Often even the organizational strategic vision or tagline is a boundary object. So it has some meaning to people, that common meaning to people, but then people can interpret it in their own way that suits their own needs. So it allows us to communicate and then collaborate in a meaningful way. So I think this is a very rich topic. The boundary object has been proven to be really important in many domains of business in terms of innovation, collaboration, and so forth. So I think that's a really rich topic to explore. So, what I like to do is, before we close, I'd like to do a few commercials for the upcoming events of xLab. If you don't mind, I'm going to just put myself into the highlight here. So the first event that I'd like you to pay attention to is upcoming Digital Futures Conference. So this is the third year that we are having this conference, and this year is going to be again virtual, given all the pandemic's concerns and so on. It's October 11th through 14th. If you come to the xLab website, you could see the full website and you could register. There's xLab member discounts, academic discounts, student discount, non-for-profit discount, all kinds of discounts you can have. And key thing here that I'd like to highlight, one of the keynote speakers we have is the general manager of GE Digital. GE Digital, which really began this whole conversation of a digital transformation of legacy company. We'll talk about where they are now. This is going to be one of the first the public presentation by senior level executives of GE Digital since their leadership change, recent leadership change. So it's going to be very important. Another important part of the conference is that we will be launching a global digital transformation maturity study. So we are developing an instrument that helps legacy companies to measure, benchmark where they are and how far they've been progressing. This is something that our participants in the past have specifically asked for as they continue their digital transformation journey. So look out for a further announcement, or if you are interested in, send us an email. The other announcement I'd like to make is that the xLab is collaborating with the city of Illyria and our strategic partner Data Swift to run our virtual hackathon. We call Hack from Home. And it is to help cities to reimagine their future. Post-industrial city like Illyria is suffering not only from pandemic, but also from the post-industrialization. So we are trying to mobilize our students, our faculty members, and also xLab members and our friends come together with the residents and small businesses and non-for-profits and community organizations. And the focus of that is how might we create a different data ecosystem where people's personal privacy is honored, and yet we are able to mobilize, unlock personal data that they have and that they own for their own benefit instead of a big tax like Facebook and Amazon and so forth, not Microsoft. And so there are different ways that you can participate. We are looking for people to participate as participants, mentors, or partners. And the last one is our next digital quarterly meeting. We're going to discuss the digital maturity study and some of the issues that came up from the conference and some of the findings, early findings that we have. So we will announce speakers and more detailed topics. But mark your calendar. It's at December 7th, same time from 1 to 2 p.m. And most likely it'll be another virtual session. So with that, I'd like to once again thank our panelists, Amol and Stefan, for their very exciting presentation. And I also would like to thank all of you for joining us today and looking forward to seeing you at these future events. And thanks again. And
thank you for having us, Professor Yu.
All right. And
thank you so much, everyone.
For xLab members and friends and board members, we have a separate Zoom link. Amol and Stefan will join and we'll continue our conversation about the metaverse and digital twin.